when I made Lingua Franca, I said to myself, I'm going to be making a film that no other American or contemporary American filmmaker is going to make, and it will leave, an impact on people.
Gihangol ko sa imong paghika. Kalukog na ako sa dilaan.
We create and make our own destinies, and when we have an ambitious goal in mind, and if we believe that we can accomplish it, we just need to work hard to make that happen.
Isabel Sandoval, hello and welcome to Jannelle. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Hi, Jannelle. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to interview you. I'm such a fangirl right now. Congratulations on the success of Lingua Franca. So it has been a coup for you as well, because you actually wrote it, directed it, even edited it, and acted in it. My gosh. And you did all that without formal training in filmmaking.
Yes.
Tell us about this.
I knew that I was a creative person at an early age, and I feel as with people who realize their calling early on, there's just it feels natural to be doing something like that. And I remember when I was 4 years old, I was born and raised in Cebu. I was raised by a single mother, and so one of my earliest childhood memories was she took me to a movie in downtown Cebu in Colon Street, starring Dolphy and Vandolph, who was 4 years old at that time. And it was like a, innocent father-son comedy. I don't remember that much about the movie itself, but I just remembered being so, awestruck by this gigantic image being projected on the screen in front of me, and that started my love affair with the movies and with cinema. And when I would come up with stories, they would always come to me as images and scenes, strung together to form a movie. So I feel like I had a natural talent for being an editor and a director early on. And so that's why when the time came to eventually make my own films, while I did not have a traditional film background, I have an undergrad degree in psychology from Cebu, the University of St. Carlos. And then after that, I moved to New York. I got an MBA from New York University. I made my first film called Senorita. I also acted in it. I co-wrote it, and I directed the film. Doing all those things and wearing those multiple creative hats in the film did not feel forced, and I did not feel intimidated. It just felt like home to me because I was enjoying every part of the process, and I just felt most alive and in my element making my films. I did not necessarily think of that as doing many tasks or performing different roles. I had one role and I had one job, which is to make a film and to tell a story that just happens to have many facets to it.
Right. And you are such a natural in all of it. I mean, as a writer, I've seen Lingua Franca, and it's told in such an amazing, engaging, seductive manner. Like you're glued on the screen. You're not like you can't even blink. Like I found myself like really glued as to what's going to happen next. Also, as an actor, you were very engaging and convincing. All the emotions that came out. So you excel at everything, obviously. But what's your favorite thing to do? If you could only pick one.
I would choose to be an editor, to be honest. And I've said it before that I really only took on those other, roles like writing, directing, and playing the lead in my films so that I'm able to get exactly the raw material that I need as an editor to make the movie that I want to make.
Right. So when you did that for all your, by the way, people are asking, because I've seen the trailer as well of Señorita. Where can we see it? Where can we catch it?
So, actually, my first two features, Senorita and Apparition, are going to be streaming in North America, US and Canada on the Criterion channel starting next month. So the Criterion channel is like Netflix for art house titles.
Okay.
So these are, films that get played in international film festivals, especially in Europe. So now they're coming to the US and Canada.
Even the trailer of Senorita, I haven't already shown the trailer, but even the trailer of
Yeah.
Senorita, I was like, oh my gosh, where can I watch this? And I was researching about you, and everyone's clamoring for the same thing. They want to watch your first two films. But you say that Lingua Franca is your third film,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it's a first for you in many ways. Tell
Yes,
us
it
about
is a first in a number of ways. It's my first film after my gender transition, and it is my first film to be set in and produced in the US. So even though I've lived in the US for 15 years, when I shot my first two features, I flew back to the Philippines because the stories are set there. But Lingua Franca is my first to be actually, the story is set in New York City.
Right. Let's spark that for a moment. I wanted to ask you, what's more difficult, being a transgender in America or being an immigrant in America? Because you touch on these two things in the film.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm very, very privileged in the sense that even though I'm a transgender woman and I'm an immigrant in the US, I live in a very progressive and liberal city like New York City. And that, in a way, you feel like you're in some kind of a bubble
Mhm.
because of that. And if I had to choose between those two, I guess being an immigrant initially, I'm lucky in that I came to the US on a student visa to pursue my master's degree. But when you graduate, you have 1 year of optional practical training. And
Yes.
so I was scrambling to find a marketing job, for instance, because my background is in marketing. And luckily I managed to, land a job just right before my OPT period expired. And I not only was I able to get a work visa, I was able to apply for an O1 visa, which is the artist visa. And that's how I was able to also get a green card as an artist.
That is lucky. I went through the same thing. I went through OPT. I scrambled to find an employer who would sponsor my visa. So it was a long process. And for immigrants, they know how long that is and how tedious it is, especially during the time when the administration is not particularly friendly, right, to immigrants like ourselves. But and so you got your visa through, or you got your green card through the O visa. Your character in Lingua Franca, and I've been meaning to ask you, why did you end it that way? Your character Olivia had a chance to get married, but she chose not to.
I need to tell you something.
I decided to end it that way because I wanted the story not necessarily to be just a love story, but it's um, Olivia's arc. That's the name of the main character. Her arc in the film is really about regaining her agency and independence and her dignity. Halfway through the film, we see that Alex, her love interest in the film, finds out that she's transgender, and because he's not necessarily mature enough to deal with that realization responsibly and in a clear-headed way, he decides to retaliate against her by coming up with a lie that ICE agents are coming after her. And when he eventually proposes to her that he wants to marry her in order to get her out of her situation, she finds herself, contemplating whether should I, you know, marry this guy and, just get myself out of this situation, but do I really want to marry someone who exploited my deepest fears and betrayed my trust in that way? And also, that kind of unexpected ending forces and invites the audience to think more deeply and more profoundly about the issues at the heart of the film, and that's immigration and also the transgender experience. In the US, I don't want the film to just end happily, because at the end of the day, these problems continue to haunt, American society. And I would not want the audience to just go back to their, comfortable lives. I want them to be haunted and unsettled and disturbed in a constructive and productive sense that compels them to ask themselves, what can I do to make the situation of people like Olivia better?
And your portrayal of it was so convincing. It's there's a lot I found myself as a viewer, and I'm sure I speak for many others, investing a lot of emotions into your like cheering you on, crying with you, crying for you. Where did you draw that? How close is Olivia to Isabel in terms of experiences?
Yeah. It's not an autobiographical film, although, we're similar. Olivia and I are similar in that we're both trans women living in Brooklyn, for instance. But, a lot of the details about her, employment are fictional. But both, being both trans women, Filipino immigrants, and because I wrote her myself, there is a lot of psychological and emotional truth to the character in terms of, for instance, well, because I started writing Lingua Franca as I was undergoing my gender transition. And, besides the physical changes, I was also noticing emotional changes within myself, but also in terms of how other people related to me, and including men, for instance. And that kind of, uncertainty and anxiety that Olivia felt becoming emotionally involved with a man who wasn't initially aware that she's transgender. So that's something, that I could really identify with. And that is what I tried to bring to life in the performance. And I think the reason why it resonates, as powerfully with some people is that, as consumers of art, we tend to invest more in art that gives us space to feel things and doesn't over explain everything. And Olivia, when you think about it, she's really an introvert like me.
Mhm.
So my challenge as a performer was how to credibly manifest and express the emotions of someone who's not necessarily the most demonstrative outwardly.
So you were when you were writing the film, you were going through your gender transition, but
Yes.
then at the same time, so I feel like it's also your emancipation
Mhm.
and the fulfillment of the film. I mean, take us through that when you first saw the film in full, that you wrote, edited, directed, and acted in. How did you feel? Take us through those emotions.
Yeah, you know, with Franca being my third film, I feel like I've come to a place of confidence about my work as an artist. When I'm editing the film and, cutting the scenes together, I really just operated on gut feeling, what felt right and what felt organic to me, in terms of, like how I'm going to frame, for instance, in terms of cinematography, in terms of the rhythm of the film, in terms of the music that I wanted to use. And for me, as an artist, I'm at my most, I think, effective when I'm being authentic and when I'm not necessarily thinking of what, other people are going to think, like what a certain festival is going to think about this creative decision. I wanted to make a film that satisfied my own wants and expectations as an audience member. And that's why the story doesn't feel like transgender 101 or transgender for dummies, for instance. I don't explain certain details about being an immigrant or being a trans person. I allow the audience to kind of fill in the details about that one. And yeah, when I saw the finished film, it felt like the film that I wanted to make. But I also felt very vindicated and relieved because it was a challenging process, in terms of making sure that I maintain my creative vision from start to finish in making the film. Like when we were trying to put the financing together, we met with some investors. We're like, oh, this needs to have more action. Like, when he finds out that she's trans, like maybe he, really explodes and, beats her up. And this trope of violence against trans women, especially trans women of color, is so common. And it's not the kind of film that I want to make. People have seen that before, and there's no reason for me to keep, churning the same thing. And even when I was cutting the film and we showed the cut to one of the investors in the Philippines, they hated the ending because it's not your usual obvious melodramatic, happy ending.
Right.
But I stood my ground and I told them this is the ending that I want to have for the film. So when we got word from the Venice International Film Festival that they wanted the film for its world premiere, I really felt, elated and exhilarated that, Venice Film Festival is one of the top 3 major film festivals in the world. And to get their stamp of approval is such a validation for an artist.
I'm getting goosebumps just listening to you. I have the scenes of the movie still fresh in my mind. Let me tell you, there's some movies that you see and that you don't want to see again because you've seen it. But
Yeah.
this is one movie that I'll see over and over because of the way you did it. There's different nuances and interpretations that you can get out of it that might not be there in just one sitting, right? And I'm very, very, very happy for you. And I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's supposed to be like a 5-6 minute segment, but so I'd like to talk more. Filmmaking in the Philippines, since you started there, how is it different from filmmaking in the US?
I think, the main difference between being a filmmaker in the Philippines and in the US, again, this is within the independent, film scene. There, in terms of distribution, it's really quite challenging because there are no established distribution systems for independent films. And in fact, when my film Apparition, which starred Jody Santa Maria and Mylene Dizon, came out in theaters in the Philippines, at that time, Jody had Be Careful with My Heart, her hit teleserie.
Yes.
So a few days after my movie premiered in theaters, there were pirated DVDs
Oh,
in the streets.
oh wow.
And I was
How
like,
heartbreaking is that?
I was like, I'm not gonna do this again. This is just not worth it. At
Right.
least in terms of distribution here in the US, there are dedicated art house distributors, and there are also, certain not just theaters now, but also streaming. And like Lingua Franca, we're very, very lucky to have been acquired by Ava Duvernay's distribution collective Array, which did a phenomenal job in terms of outreach and the PR for the film. When we premiered in late August, both me and Lingua Franca were featured in like Los Angeles Times, Vanity Fair, IndieWire. A lot of these major publications really featured the film.
You caught her eye, you caught Ava's eye, and now you found yourself a mentor. What are you learning from her so far?
Um, as minority artists, we need to be the own architect of our career. Because Hollywood really centers and privileges the perspective and the experience of cisgender white men in particular. That puts the onus on us as minority creators and storytellers to think of the possibilities of the stories that we can tell and really forge our way to breaking into the industry and having that autonomy and that control to tell our own stories. And Ava is very much a terrific example of that. She was an outsider who really worked her way into the industry, and now she's breaking the gates wide open for filmmakers like myself and other underrepresented voices. And so the films that are actually released in Array are films not just by persons of color or women filmmakers, but these are true visionary filmmakers who are making films that are not being made by any other contemporary American filmmakers, and that will be talked about for years to come.
Any advice? Has she given you any advice that sticking to you or something that you'll carry with you?
The best advice I've gotten from Ava is just to be authentic. Do not compromise your vision or your voice. Make the film and the art that you want to make without pandering to your audience, and they will meet you halfway if you have the audacity and the confidence to tell it your way.
I love that. And you know what? You've achieved success in filmmaking, like far more than what regular filmmakers, other filmmakers have achieved, because there are many that are struggling, have struggled for years to make it, and they still haven't. And from someone like you, your filmmaking journey without even a formal filmmaking school or film school, right? Did you expect to get this far and this quickly?
To be quite honest, in the back of my mind, I did, and for me, visualization has been so essential for me to getting to where I am now. I mean, just touching on what I said earlier about visualizing and imagining possibilities for ourselves. When I made Lingua Franca, I said to myself, I'm going to be making a film that no other American or contemporary American filmmaker is going to make, and it will leave, an impact on people. And I, because I, conditioned myself that way, I found myself making decisions, creatively, logistically, and professionally that led me to where I am now. And so I guess the very, very short uh, way to articulate it is like fake it till you make it in some sense. We create and make our own destinies. And we, when we have an ambitious goal in mind, and if we believe that we can accomplish it, we just need to work hard to make that happen.
Do you think that the secret to being seen or heard is also a confluence of time? Because now is the time for people speaking up, for people of color being provided platforms and things like that. Do you think that also played a role in your case, in your journey?
Certainly, and it's also, I think, embracing what makes me unique. As an artist, we are told, especially like I joke to friends that I'm a gold star minority because I'm a woman filmmaker, I'm a trans woman,
Yes.
I'm a trans woman of color, and I'm an immigrant. And from the perspective of Hollywood, that would make someone like me very niche.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, that also makes me truly singular and unique and different. And because I embraced that and celebrated that in my own work, that made, that distinguished me as a storyteller. And because there's a lot of pressure for us as minorities to kind of conform to certain formulas. Like we need to make, your film or your TV series appeal to as many people as possible, and in the process, filter down, and water down what makes us really unique and interesting and compelling. And I just did not, agree to that. And that gamble and that risk has paid off, at least for me. And I would want other artists, in my background or in my position to hopefully be emboldened and be empowered by, what happened to Lingua Franca and to my career because
Your
of that vision.
your story is definitely very inspiring. What's next for you?
Um, this last few months have been very exciting for me. I'm currently being represented by CAA, the Creative Artists Agency, by the same manager, by the same agent that represents Taika Waititi, Patty Jenkins, and Ava Duverney. I'm currently working on a TV series for FX. It's a crime drama. And I'm also developing a memoir by another Filipina writer, Meredith Talusan. It's called Ferris. I'm developing that into potentially a TV series for Topic Studios.
I am so excited for you. You have already given us a lot of advice throughout this whole thing, but there's two things that I want to ask. Actually, you gave us advice for aspiring filmmakers out there. I guess the advice is, be authentic, right? Don't compromise. What about your immigrant advice? We have a segment here on the show called So True, where we feature immigrant stories. And as you know, every immigrant goes through different struggles, right? There's homesickness, there's like financial struggles because you don't know, you get your footing, getting your papers in order and all that. What would you advise those immigrants that are watching it right now, that are here in the States right now and are having a hard time?
I would suggest, in terms of, for instance, finding a path or a route to citizenship, we all come from different, and unique backgrounds. That doesn't necessarily make that a hindrance. We just need to be more resourceful and creative about the routes that we can take. Like, even though my background, I studied business at New York University, I ended up getting a visa as an artist, for instance, because when I was in college, I used to write for a nationally circulated paper and I was a journalist. And so, yeah, it's really just being creative and resourceful and doing a lot of research.
So when you look in the mirror now, what do you tell yourself?
I'm looking myself in the mirror, I would say that you've gotten this far by taking risks and being ambitious and not backing down. And there's no reason for you to stop doing that. Keep dreaming seemingly impossible dreams and you'll make it happen.
Looking back on your journey, would there be anything that you would change?
I wouldn't change anything because the person that I am now is very much the product of all my experiences, my challenges, and my successes.
And so when you, if you were given a chance to talk to your younger self, what would you tell that younger self?
Don't compare yourself with other people. Each one of us has our own individual path. And if you compare yourself with others and their achievements, you will only end up getting disappointed because, you're very much your own person. And what's important is that you get to know yourself and your strengths.
Amazing, Isabel. You've carved a path all to yourself, and you did it without compromising, without backing down, and by staying true to yourself. That is amazing. Congratulations. And we hope to have you back.
Yes, hopefully next time when my movie's nominated for an Oscar.
Yes, of
And
course.
maybe win.